For today's discussion of our Torah portion, before we get to the Torah portion, I want to start by discussing a little bit of the holiday of Shavuot. Shavuot is in 2 weeks from now, and I'm thinking a lot about Shavuot this year because I was just at Har Sinai, and so therefore it's on my mind. Shavuot is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah at Sinai. So I wanted to first share one or two thoughts about Shavuot as we prepare for Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah. So first thought comes from today's Daf Yomi, which is a discussion of David and Goliath. David battles Goliath, and the Talmud tells us that while we know David is a descendant of Ruth, Goliath is a descendant of Ruth's sister-in-law, Orpah. So that's what the Talmud says, that the Goliath is a descendant of Orpah. And let me just recap for those who don't remember the full story from last year. The recap of the story is Elimelech goes to the plains of Moab with his wife Naomi and his two sons, Machlon and Chilion. Machlon and Chilion marry Ruth and Orpah before Elimelech, Machlon, and Chilion die. And then Ruth decides that the famine in the land of Canaan is finished. And so she says she's going to return. And Ruth and Orpah decide to accompany Naomi on her way back. Excuse me. And when Naomi says, don't come. And it says that eventually Orpah cries and is convinced. And she kisses her mother-in-law Naomi and turns back. Whereas Ruth cleaves to her, Dovkaba. She cleaves to her and she says, where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die. There I'll be buried. Your God, your people are my people. So your God is my God. These are the words of Ruth. So the Talmud says the following in today's Daf Yomi. It's related to the holiday of Shavuot. The Talmud tells us, it says in the verse in the book of Ruth, Vatishak Orpah l'chamota v'Ruth davkaba. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, and Ruth cleaved to her. So what does that mean? And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, and Ruth cleaved to her. Talmud explains, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak. Rabbi Yitzchak taught, Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu. God taught, or God said, Yavo b'nei neshuka, that let the offspring of the one who kissed, i.e. the offspring of Orpah, who is that? That's Goliath and his siblings, his other giant siblings. Let them come, v'yiplu biyad b'nei adavuka. Let them fall into the hands of the one who cleaved, i.e. who cleaved? Ruth cleaved to Naomi. Orpah kissed Naomi. So let the offsprings of the one who kissed fall into the hands of the offspring of the one who cleaved. Let Goliath fall into the hands of David. Goliath's maternal ancestor was Orpah. Therefore, she kissed Naomi. She only kissed Naomi. Therefore, he's going to fall into the hands of David, whose maternal ancestor is Ruth, and she did more than kiss. She cleaved. She committed fully. So in this context, I saw from Rabbi Rosner cited in his Daf Yomi. I like to listen to several Daf Yomi's shiurim, and Rabbi Rosner cited Rabbi Lamb's essay, Rabbi Norman Lamb of blessed memory, his essay from his book called Festivals of Faith, which I actually have. So I was able to look it up. And this sermon was given in 1954. He gave this sermon in 1954. And by the way, how inspiring is it that this person gave a sermon in 1954 and we're reading it today. The words still speak to me. Hopefully they speak to you. That's the power. You know, how many things that we are going to say today do you think will be relevant 2 hours from now, let alone 2 years, let alone 70 years later? So, I mean, we're recording this year and it's on YouTube. So if anybody's watching this 70 years from now, please send a message to my God willing grandchildren and tell them I say hi. Okay? I'm waving to them, tell them I love them. Okay, so the point that Rabbi Lamb makes is the point that Rabbi Lamb makes is, how come Orpah's descendants? Orpah was also a good person. She was also willing to accompany Naomi. How come her descendants ended up as Goliath, a Philistine, the enemy of Israel, whereas Ruth's descendants ended up as David, the Messiah? What's the difference between them? And this is what Rabbi Lamb writes. Why was fate so good to Ruth and so harsh on Orpah? Did not Orpah also offer to remain with Naomi and accept Torah instead of a civilization of immorality? Orpah also offered to go. So he says the answer lies in this wording that Orpah kissed her and Ruth cleaved to her. This was the essential difference between Ruth's and Orpah's attitudes toward Naomi and therefore Torah. Orpah only kissed, while Ruth cleaved and clung. The clinging and deep attachment of a Ruth becomes the profound passion for truth and the noble clinging to God of a David and of a people Israel. And the superficiality of Orpah, symbolized by the kiss, degenerates into the rabid and demonic wickedness of a Goliath. The lukewarm attraction becomes the very cold antipathy. Superficiality must always buckle and fall when the real test comes before the power of sincerity and the might of depth and true loyalty. And he writes here in 1954, he says, the B'nai Neshuka, i.e. the ones who just kiss, they're always ready with ubiquitous and easy expression of affection. Synagogue, nice. Services, beautiful. Kashrus, a fine thing for some people. He writes, all our Jewish institutions are treated with the saccharine sweetness symbolized by the superficial and sugar-coated kiss. But the B'nai Devuka, the offspring of David, of Ruth, which is i.e. David, they view these things otherwise. Synagogue is not nice, but urgent, necessary. Services are not beautiful, but profound, soul-stirring. Jewish education is not necessary, but essential, a matter of life and death. Kashrus, not just good ideas, but the very cornerstones of our faith and survival. The B'nai Neshuka kiss the mezuzah. The B'nai Devuka cling to what is written therein. The B'nai Neshuka close the siddur, kiss it, and leave it in the synagogue. The B'nai Devuka close it, take its message with them, open their hearts to it, and begin to practice it. B'nai Neshuka express affection. B'nai Devuka impress with passion and devotion. So anyway, that's the first point I wanted to make today. And that's what Rabbi Lamb is saying, that Orpah represented this superficial, sweet connection to the faith. But ultimately, it won't last without a deep commitment of cleaving. And that's something I think that history has borne out. If our connection to our faith is light and not passionate, it's like being a little bit off. If you're plotting a design and you're a little bit off in the building, everything is going to be off as more and more time. If it's not underpinned with a tremendous sense of cleaving, then we're in trouble. And that's the difference between the Bnei Neshuka and how Naomi's descendants ended up as Goliath, and David's descendants, and Orpah's and Ruth's, how Orpah's descendants ended up as Goliath, and Naomi and Ruth's descendants ended up as David. Because that's the first thing I wanted to share today. If anybody has a comment, I'll take it. Otherwise, we'll go on.